Rebirth Battle+Marriage before Love+Sweet Pets and Mutual Pets+Male second husband chasing wife Crematorium+Hand in hand tragedy. Gu Mingtang has always admired Su Ji, and the two of them were a perfect match for each other. They were both talented and beautiful, and eventually became husband and wife. The person hidden in Su Ji's heart has always been her illegitimate sister Gu Mingshao, a gentleman of the Su family, who made her live a widow for a full 6 years for Gu Mingshao's sake. After being reborn, Gu Mingtang looked down on love and only wanted to stay away from Su Ji, take good care of her mother, and find her long-lost younger brother, to hold on to everything that originally belonged to them. In Gu Ho's mansion, his aunt harbors evil intentions, and his father gives up a house with favoritism. Gu Mingtang and his daughter are isolated and helpless. By chance, Gu Mingtang accidentally saved Fu Ding, the second son of Prince Su's mansion, and thus embarked on the path of Prince Su's mansion. Second young master, if you want to repay kindness, why not make a promise with your own life? She was half serious and half joking. The man's surprised expression only lingered on his face for a moment before responding confidently, "Okay, I happen to be missing a wife." Gu Mingtang originally thought that she and this man were just taking what they needed, but gradually realized that he was the one he had been waiting for a long time. Chapter 001. Returning to Cardamom. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Marquis' mansion in Guanyang was decorated with lights and decorations everywhere, but the Lufeng courtyard was lifeless and lifeless. Gu Mingtang's body is getting worse and worse, and now it can be considered the end of a strong crossbow. The doctor has invited countless people, and even the imperial physician in the palace has come to the mansion to check her pulse. After seeing it, everyone shook their heads and said that they had been feeling depressed for a long time, and now they have injured the liver meridian, and time is running out. Speaking of which, the Su family treated her fairly well, even hiring the imperial physician in the palace. The Su family has done their best, but it is her own health that is not up to par. Today is New Year's Eve. After her husband Su Ji enters the palace to report on his work, he will return to the mansion, and then the couple can reunite. Su Ji served as an outsider for 3 years, and their husband and wife have been together for 3 years. Now that Su Ji has served his full term, he has finally been transferred back to the capital. Lotus, when is it? Gu Mingtang hoped that Su Ji could come back early and see him for the last time. She knew that her time was running out, and she also knew that she was haggard and had an unsightly complexion. Seeing him like this would probably make him feel even more disgusted. But Gu Mingtang can't handle so much anymore. She has something to say to Su Ji. There is a misunderstanding between them, and if this misunderstanding cannot be explained clearly, she may not be able to rest assured even if she dies. She wants to tell him that it was Gu Mingshao who caused her back then. Yes, Gu Mingshao, the white moonlight and emotions in his heart are hard to calm. If he knew that Gu Mingshao had malicious intentions at a young age, would he feel that all these years of infatuation had been wrongly paid? After all, in his heart, Gu Mingshao is a pure white existence. She is kind and beautiful, and she dare not even step on an ant. Years of misunderstandings are about to be clarified, and Gu Mingtang cannot conceal his excitement. With this little motivation, she could even get out of bed. Fuqiu is Gu Mingtang's eldest maid and has been following her since she was in the Gu family. I have always been loyal and devoted, and now I am in my 20s. I still refuse to get married, just to be by my master's side. Or rather, to be able to send her on the final journey. Gu Mingtang has already thought about it, and there is nothing she can do about it. After she leaves, her money will be distributed to those around her who are dedicated and kind to her. Madam, it's midnight. Lotus lifted the curtain and entered. Seeing Gu Mingtang sit up with her body propped up, Fuqiu immediately waved away the hand of the little maid who was serving her beside her. She personally supported her and said lightly, "You're sick, how can you go down to the ground?" "It's okay, I want to go sit by the window." Lotus couldn't bear to caress her, so she could only cautiously support her all the way, and Haosheng helped her to sit under the window. After only taking these few steps, Gu Mingtang felt as if he had exhausted all his strength. She leaned against the long collapsed window, panting heavily and unable to move any further. "Madam, Madam Gu is here." The servant girl's voice rang out outside the partition, and then a soft and familiar voice followed. "I'm coming to see my younger sister." Gu Mingshao walked into the inner bedroom with a beautiful appearance. She was dressed beautifully, and as soon as she entered the room, the whole room was full of radiance, which further accentuated Gu Mingtang's lifeless state. Gu Mingtang's empty and lifeless eyes were fixed on Gu Mingshao, and her white lotus-like face stirred up hatred in her heart. Her and Su Ji's tragedies were both born out of her. Why did sister come? Gu Mingtang felt powerless, unable to even express her hatred. Gu Mingshao, however, didn't seem to be a guest. She took the initiative to sit next to her and affectionately held her hand, saying, "Is my sister hoping for Su Sangu to come back? So that we can meet for the last time?" She blinked her beautiful apricot eyes and said, "Look at you, you've all looked like this. What else are you doing?" It couldn't help but make his heart even more congested. Ming was saying something heart-wrenching, but she still maintains that delicate tone that has remained unchanged for thousands of years. Gu Mingshao has not changed at all, she has been like this since childhood. It's just that she's foolish, she never saw through her thoughts. "I know now, but it's already too late." Gu Mingtang was as angry as a thread, unable to say a word for a moment. On the side, Lotus stomped her feet in hatred and disregarded her identity as she began to drive away guests. "Miss, if you don't come to see our wife sincerely, you can just leave." Gu Mingshao glanced lightly at Fuziu and smiled, "Fuziu, your wife is running out of time. Why are you so loyal? You have offended the future mistress of this courtyard. How can you have a foothold here in the future? What are you saying?" Gu Mingtang couldn't believe it. She hasn't died yet, have Gu Mingshao and Su Ji already been secretly hiding? Fu Chu's face and ears turned red with anger, and she boldly shouted in front of her, "You're talking nonsense. The third master is going to be transferred back to Beijing, so he needs to reunite with his wife. Our wife's illness will recover soon, how can it be your turn?" Gu Mingshao, however, was very confident and sat there calmly, coldly watching the master and servant jumping in front of her. "Fuziu, don't deceive yourself anymore. You know if your wife can still recover from this illness." Looking at Gu Mingtang again, Gu Mingshao smiled even more proudly. "Second sister, I don't need to deceive you. You are a dying person. What should I deceive you for? Think for yourself. If neither the Su family nor Su Sangu had the intention, how could I, a widowed widow who has lost her husband, step onto the Su family's door on New Year's Eve? You're sick, there's so much you don't know." Gu Mingtang felt that she might not be able to endure until Su Ji came back. Her mind was now very confused, and she could always see many scenes of her youth in a daze. For example, she now sees her mother lying on the bed, smiling and waving at her. Kunyang had already passed away a few years ago. "Sister, sister, please come in your ear." Gu Mingtang gasped for breath and slowly lifted his right hand as she exerted her last bit of strength to avenge her. At this moment, Gu Mingshao did not take Gu Mingtang seriously, so it was also careless. After she leaned in, Gu Mingtang immediately pulled out a plain hairpin from his hair with all his strength and speed, and stabbed it randomly. Suddenly, Gu Mingshao's beautiful peony-like face turned into a cactus. The screams pierced through the sky, and Su Ji, who had already reached the middle courtyard, heard the sound and quickly took 3 and 2 steps towards the back courtyard. On her deathbed, Gu Mingtang finally met her long-awaited husband and returned her young man. But the first thing her young man did when he broke into the door was to hold Gu Mingshao, whose face was covered in injuries, in his arms. At this moment, Gu Mingtang felt a wave of relief in his heart. Actually, there's no need to tell Suji that secret anymore. It's the same whether to say it or not. What can be changed? Gu Mingtang had no regrets in her heart. Seeing this last scene, she no longer had any attachment to this world. If there is an afterlife, she only wishes to have no further involvement with Suji. Gu Mingtang thought he had already passed away, but after a long sleep, he woke up to find himself still lying in bed. And her body was not as tired as before, she felt refreshed and light all over. Lotus. Gu Mingtang immediately shouted loudly. Even the voice is loud and powerful. Quickly, a girl wearing a double bun walked in. The girl's face turned out to be the same as when Lotus was young. Lotus. Gu Mingtang hesitated and called her, not daring to recognize her for a moment. Miss, are you awake? It's the voice of Lotus, but she actually calls herself a girl. Chapter 002. First Battle. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Miss, you're only recovering from your illness. The doctor instructed you to rest well and lie down quickly. Gu Mingtang, who had just propped up and sat up, was pushed back by the young girl who arrived in time, Fu Chu. Gu Mingtang was puzzled, is she still sick? She clearly felt very relaxed on her body, which she had never felt in a long time. It's only February, and it's still cold. How cold the water in the pond is. You had a fever last night, and although the fever has subsided now, your body is still weak. Gu Mingtang seemed to suddenly remember that in the early spring of her 14-year-old year, she stumbled and stepped into a pond, where she fell ill. In fact, her body is still weak now, but compared to her later major illness, this minor illness may not be a big deal, so she doesn't feel uncomfortable now. After recalling that incident, the blurry memory gradually became clearer. During those days when she was sick, she did not feel well. It was just because she was afraid that her grandmother might think she was getting sick from playing, so she kept lying in bed and couldn't rest well. Therefore, she always propped herself up day by day to wake up. Later on, although her body gradually improved, she fell ill with Kuei-Shui disease. She always feels weak during the days before and after coming to Kuei-Shui every month. The lotus in front of her is real, and she is also warm, so is she not dreaming? Did she really go back to the year of 14? Lotus was still chattering, but Gu Mingtang couldn't help but burst into tears with excitement. Upon seeing this, Fu Chu quickly knelt down by the bed and said, I have violated the rules. I deserve to die. I shouldn't blame the girl. She's not just criticizing, she's just being insincere and caring. Lotus, get up. Gu Mingtang bent down and personally helped her up, agreeing to her. Okay, I'll take good care of her. In fact, even if Lotus didn't nag, she planned to take good care of her once again. Taking good care of oneself is more important than anything else. Maid Mulyen hurriedly walked in and said, Miss, come and visit me, Mississippi. Gu Mingshao. Gu Mingtang secretly raised his eyebrows. She didn't expect to get back into contact with Gu Mingshao so soon. Gu Mingtang remained calm on her face, and when Gu Mingshao walked in, she still greeted her with a smile as before. Big sister, it's so cold. Could you please come and see me? Gu Mingtang's mood is completely different now. After learning the truth in his past life, he hated Gu Mingshao and wished he could personally cut her neck and drink her blood. There is no hatred towards her now, just treating her purely as an enemy. She hasn't lost anything yet, her body is still healthy, and her mother is still alive. She doesn't need to waste too much emotion on Gu Mingshao and Su Ji. What she needs to do is to hold on to everything she should hold on to. Gu Mingshao was very friendly. She didn't sit on the chair brought by the maid, but instead sat on the edge of the bed, directly next to Gu Mingtang. She was not afraid that Gu Mingtang would pass on his illness to her, even the lotus flowers were very moved, let alone Gu Mingtang from back then. Back then, Gu Mingtang really liked and trusted Gu Mingshao, the big sister. What is tiredness? Tanger, it's an outsider to say such things. You and my sisters have always felt good since childhood. Don't you deserve it when I come to see you when you are ill? If you say such an outsider again in the future, I will be angry. If it weren't for a rebirth, with Gu Mingshao's words, Gu Mingtang would never have thought that she was hiding a knife in her smile. Big sister is right, it's Tanger's fault. Tanger won't be polite to you from now on. After that, Gu Mingtang took the initiative to grab Gu Mingshao's hand as a gesture of affection. She clearly felt that Gu Mingshao instinctively avoided it, which was a subconscious action. Perhaps she also felt that avoiding it was not good in her heart, so she gritted her head and held her hand. Sister, don't worry. The doctor said, I have a good foundation and can recover in just 2 days. Sister, don't worry about me. However, after finishing speaking, Gu Mingtang coughed violently. Upon seeing this, Lotus quickly came over and gently patted Gu Mingtang's back to help her calm down. And Gu Mingshao took this opportunity to move away. She quietly moved away from the edge of the bed and sat on the stool prepared by the maid before. Speak less and drink more water. You're not as sensible as your maid Futsu, Gu Mingshao said in her caring tone. But Gu Mingtang's intense cough was feigned. Sure enough, Gu Mingshao's concern and affection for her from the early morning are not true. Gu Mingtang naturally praised Fu Chu and said, Fu Chu has been with me since childhood, taking care of me like a sister. In my heart, I didn't treat her like a maid. Gu Mingtang was telling the truth, especially after experiencing the hardships of our past lives. Gu Mingshao glanced at Futsu and then smiled at Gu Mingtang, saying, Juqiu has married someone. Are you the only one who can get started with you now? You may be able to promote one of the people below. Generally speaking, for a young lady like us, the standard configuration for a big maid around us is 2 or more. A faint smile flashed around Gu Mingtang's mouth. She knew what calculations Gu Mingshao was up to, but she only evaded and said, let's talk about it later. I don't have anything important to do here, so for now, only Fu Chu is enough. Gu Mingshao also believes that now is not the time to say this. There will be a long way to go, and there will be plenty of opportunities in the future. So, with a change in tone, she went on to something else. I came to remind you today that my grandmother is very unhappy about your mistake and falling into the water. You should take good care of yourself these days and go to her elderly home to show filial piety. If you say something nice, she may forget about it and not pursue this matter. In her past life, Gu Mingshao came over and said these things to her. After hearing this, she was very anxious in her heart. She was afraid that her grandmother would be angry, so even though her body was still weak, she still struggled to hold on day by day and remain calm in the morning. That's all, I felt some cold diseases on my body. She thought that Gu Mingshao had taken advantage of her fear of her grandmother, which is why she specifically mentioned these things. Because she knows her personality well enough, she knows that after listening to these things, in order to leave a good impression with her grandmother, she will definitely insist on going over every day to pay her respects. My grandmother is a serious elderly person. She doesn't like their second wife at all. If she catches any mistakes again, she will be punished severely. But after being reborn, Gu Mingtang no longer cares about that. At present, the top priority is to take good care of oneself. However, Gu Mingtang still pretended to be afraid and said, really? How could this be good? Grandmother must be very angry. No, I can't continue to lie in bed anymore. I have to go and pay her respects. If she really blames me, I'll admit my mistake immediately. Maybe she won't be so angry anymore. As he spoke, he deliberately wanted to lift up the quilt, but was held down by both Lotus and Gu Mingshao at the same time. Gu Mingshao remained in her caring tone as she gently said, it's neither morning nor evening now, and there's really no need to go and say hello at this time. You should rest well first. If you're really scared and in a hurry to go, you'll have to wait until evening. Gu Mingtang nodded hurriedly and said, "That's right. Thank you very much for reminding me, big sister. I'll go over and say hello in the evening." Chapter 003. Was deceived by the second girl. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After Gu Mingshao left, Fu Chu looked worried and said, "Miss, do you really want someone to go to the old lady to take a leave? If you scold, just scold. It's still important for your health." Of course, Gu Mingtang had to send someone to take leave. Just now, it was just for Gu Mingshao to listen to. If her guess is correct, Gu Mingshao will definitely go to Rongan Hall to pay respects a little earlier, and then find an opportunity to tell the old lady about her going to pay respects as well. In fact, the old lady is a bit more serious. She is not really mean. Her granddaughter is playful and falls into the cold. She mostly says that she is not sensible and will not really punish her. On the contrary, if she disregards her own body and insists on going to pay respects, her elderly family will feel that she is unstable. So, she won't go this time, but she just wants Gu Mingshao to find herself bored. Sure enough, it was early evening when Gu Mingshao went to Rongan Hall first. Gu Mingshao is the eldest daughter of the second family. Although she was born out of wedlock, her biological mother, Shao Shi, was originally a young lady from a wealthy family. On the contrary, it is Gu Mingtang's mother, who is the daughter of a merchant's family. Gu Mingshao was raised by the Shao family from a young age. When the Shao family was not defeated, the Shao family was a somewhat famous talented woman. Now personally raising my daughter is naturally raising her up to the same level as I did back then. Gu Mingshao is the eldest daughter, full of poetry and gentle temperament. At the age of only 14, she is also somewhat famous in Beijing. Gu Mingshao has a good character and a broad understanding. When outsiders talk about her, they all praise her. She can earn a good reputation for the Gu family, so Mrs. Gu naturally prefers two things. Upon arriving at Rongan Hall, Gu Mingshao bowed and respectfully said, "My granddaughter has seen my grandmother." Mrs. Gu sat up straight and saw that it was Shao Maiden. She smiled a bit and said, "You sit down." "Thank you, grandmother." Knowing that her elderly family values rules, Gu Mingshao always follows the rules and regulations at Rongan Hall, not daring to slack off at all. "Have you gone to see second girl? How is she doing?" When mentioning Gu Mingtang, Mrs. Gu's face became a bit serious, and she was somewhat unhappy about her instability in her heart. Falling into the water was a slip, an accident, and she didn't do it intentionally. But why did it happen that it wasn't someone else who fell into the water, but it happened to be her? It's okay to be at home. If such a fool were to appear outside in the future, how would outsiders say they care about their family? Don't ask her to give the Gu family a long face, just don't add any trouble. The maid brought a stool and placed it in front of the old lady, while Gu Mingshao only sat for half a seat. In front of the old man, she sat upright with slightly lowered eyebrows and eyes, which not only did not lose the demeanor of a young lady from the Marquis' mansion, but also appeared humble and courteous. "I've seen it, and my second sister is lying in bed. I've advised her not to come and pay her respects when she's so sick. I'll help her take leave in front of you. But she's afraid you'll scold her, so she insisted on coming. I can't resist either, so I can only rely on her." Sure enough, Mrs. Gu's face turned even worse. She snorted, "I'm afraid I'm not happy. Why can't I act more prudently in my daily life? When I'm sick, I rest well in the room. It's obvious that she's not sincere to invite in for fear of me not being happy. What does she do? She always disregards the importance of things and only knows how to do these superficial things." The old lady's reaction was within Gu Mingshao's expectations. She felt proud that Gu Mingtang had once again offended her, but she spoke up to help Gu Mingtang, saying, "My second sister is still young, and her personality is like this. She is innocent, romantic, and very simple. If there is anything wrong with her, you adults don't remember to be petty. Don't judge her in the same way. Still young. You are only half a year older than her, but you are much more secure than her. On weekdays, your sisters walk around each other more. If she does something bad, you should say something as the elder sister. However, Gu Mingshao stood up with a hint of shyness. Second sister is the legitimate one, and I am the illegitimate one. The legitimate one is superior to the illegitimate one, and the granddaughter dare not exceed the rules to teach second sister. He said, second sister is just being more playful. She has a grandmother and mother to teach her, and she will definitely be better than her granddaughter in the future. It's better not to mention the Yu family, but when it comes to the Yu family, the old lady regrets her decision back then. In order to covet the rich dowry of the Yu family, she beat up the Mandarin ducks and separated Erlang and Shao. I originally thought that her identity as a merchant woman would only be that of a second wife. In the future, she would not be a tomb woman or in charge of the family. It may not sound good to say it out loud, and she would not lose face with the Marquis' mansion. But who would have thought that the heavens would not be human? Once the father and son of Dalong were both killed in battle on the battlefield, and the mansion was cut off. This title was forced to fall into the hands of the second wife. Erlang became a Marquis, and Yu's wife naturally became a Marquis' wife due to her husband's high status. Let a merchant woman become the head of the household, and their family in the capital has become a complete joke. Except for her face and the dowry behind her, there was nothing that you could handle. Her daughter is just like her, apart from having a beautiful appearance, who can excel in character and talent. If the Marquis is legitimate and cannot marry into a good family in the future, it will be a joke on both sides. Thinking of these things gives Mrs. Gu a headache. If I had known today, I shouldn't have let you take care of her own daughter. If I had known, she would have personally raised the second girl under her lap, and it wouldn't have been like this now. Outside, a nanny suddenly walked in and asked, "Madam, please see the maid next to Miss Eyre." "Didn't the second girl come?" Mrs. Gu asked. The nanny replied, "I only saw one girl, I didn't see two girls." "Let her in." Gu Mingtang was sent by Futsu. After Futsu came in, she squatted down to greet her, and then said calmly, "I came to take leave for Miss Eyre. Miss Eyre is sick and can't get up in bed. The doctor also instructed me to stay in bed and rest for a few more days." Miss Eyre was originally conflicted about whether to drag her sick body to greet her, but after careful consideration, she decided not to show her strength. Miss Eyre said she knew she was wrong, and when her body is fully recovered, she will take the initiative to come to the old lady to apologize. After hearing this, Gu Mingshao instinctively frowned. She didn't know what had happened after she left, so Gu Mingtang suddenly changed his mind. Mrs. Gu is a reasonable person, so she can listen to Fu Chu's words. Even, she felt that Gu Mingtang's decision was to consider the overall situation. I was originally angry with her in my heart, but now I see that her way of handling things is quite steady. The old lady not only lost her anger in her heart, but also developed a new liking for her. So there was also a tone of concern for her. Then take good care of yourself, there's no need to come over these days. You go back and tell her, there's no need to rush to see me. If you really have filial piety, just don't make me angry in the future. Fu Chu immediately said. Second Miss also said that after this incident, she will definitely be more stable in the future. She will also learn and seek advice from the eldest Miss in everything, and she will abide by herself. Well, it's good to have this realization. Mrs. Gu was quite satisfied, and her face was no longer tense. Her expression was much more relaxed. You go back and take good care of your master. Yes, I'm leaving. Gu Mingshao felt a bit embarrassed and couldn't sit still. She also stood up and said goodbye. My granddaughter won't disturb my grandmother anymore. My granddaughter is leaving. After returning to the Shaoxiang courtyard and closing the door, Gu Mingshao finally pulled her face down. Mei Dong, the maidservant on the side, also felt depressed for her master. She said regretfully, "In the afternoon, Miss Eyre said she would go to pay her respects, but suddenly changed her mind. She felt very strange. It shouldn't be. Miss Eyre must have been the first to tell you about any situation in the past. I didn't come to discuss with you today, so I just sent someone to Rongan Hall. As soon as Mingtang finished speaking, a maid came in and reported, the lotus flowers in Eyre Mrs. Yard have arrived. Chapter 004. Send a maid here. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. De co lois ara trong quatrin lay text. Chapter 005. Former husband Su Sanlang. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. At noon the next day, Gu Mingtang went to Yu's place. She brought a few changed clothes and plans to temporarily stay with her mother. Lest Gu Mingshao say something in front of her mother when she is not around, which will worsen her mother's condition. Last night when Lotus came over to talk, Yu was startled. After repeatedly confirming that her daughter was really okay, Yu finally breathed a sigh of relief. But I stayed up all night worrying about my daughter. At this moment, seeing her daughter standing in front of her, Yu couldn't help but shed tears. She hugged her daughter into her arms and moaned heartily one by one. You can't have an accident. If you have another accident, my mother really can't live anymore. Yu sure was really sad because she thought of her lost son again. Gu Mingtang was also crying uncontrollably. She missed her mother too much. Especially in that lifetime, she suffered so much injustice. Mother, I won't have any trouble, I will definitely be okay. You also need to be okay, we mother and daughter will never be separated for a lifetime. Gu Mingtang pounced on her mother's arms, acting coquettishly. Yu sure smiled and said she was a silly girl talking nonsense. My daughter is getting old and will eventually go to her husband's house. How can you never be separated from your mother for the rest of your life? If you really become an old girl, your mother will be extremely anxious. When it comes to getting married, Gu Mingtang couldn't help but think of Su Ji. Thinking of Su Ji and his past unfeeling emotions, Gu Mingtang's entire face turned cold. Her feelings for Su Ji had completely disappeared when she saw him holding Gu Mingshao in his arms at the last moment of that life. She has completely lost her heart to him. In this life, she doesn't want to have any further involvement with Su Ji. But she didn't want to mention this person, but her mother happened to mention it in her ear. Do you remember the third son of the Su family? When he was young, he came to our house with his grandmother as a guest. You even praised him at that time, saying that you had never seen such a beautiful brother before. Gu Mingtang knew she was talking about Su Ji, but he pretended not to understand and said, which Su family? It's the Su family of the Marquis mansion in Guanyang. The Yu family's daughter couldn't help but feel uneasy about such a family. When we were young, the old ladies of our families even mentioned that they wanted to marry you. If it were Gu Mingtang from a previous life, she would have been ashamed to hear such words. After a lifetime of seeing through love, Gu Mingtang remained calm and said, "Oh, did you mention it? I don't remember. You're such a big-hearted child, you've forgotten such an important thing. When your mother and you were both here, you even took the initiative to go and help others, saying you wanted to give them candy, making them speechless. At that time, my daughter was only 4 years old, and Su Sanlang was only 7 or 8 years old, both children, which was not a big deal." Of course, Gu Mingtang remembers this. He used to think of it as sweet, but now it's just disgusting. I don't remember. She denied it and didn't want to mention Su Ji. Gu Mingtang interrupted and said, "My daughter is at the age of matchmaking, so she doesn't necessarily have to be from the Su family. With so many good families in the capital, how could we have to compare and choose? It's not that we have to be from the Su family. My mother doesn't mean it's necessary for the Su family, she just thinks that Su Sanlang has gained fame at a young age and is a rare talent. Of course, marriage is a big deal, it's about your lifelong happiness, and you have to like it. Mom, why don't we talk about this today? I'm already sick and talking about it, it hurts my head." At the age of 14, you can still act coquettishly, especially in front of your own mother. Gu Mingtang ignored her and kept holding her tightly. My daughter clings to herself, and Yu's heart is extremely soft. In this vast mansion, my daughter is the closest person to me. Okay, don't mention it, just don't mention it, Mom. Gu Mingtang took the opportunity and said, Mom, you need to quickly raise your body. If your daughter is old, you still need to take her out to see her. In the future, I will find a good son-in-law for you and be filial to you for the rest of my life. It's okay to be filial or not, just treat your mother well. Being kind to me is necessary, but one must also wholeheartedly show filial piety to their mother. Therefore, this alone excluded Su Ji. He is not good to their mother and daughter, he is good to Aunt Xiao and her daughter. Gu Mingtang is young and has a good foundation, so he recovers quickly. After recovering, Gu Mingtang moved out of here. It's not that she doesn't want to continue living with her mother, but rather that there are rules in the house. Since she already has a separate courtyard, if she continues to squeeze by her mother's side like she did when she was a child, she is afraid that the old lady will be unhappy. Grandmother's heart is not bad, but she is a bit serious and rigid. She had her own set of rules in her heart, and Gu Mingtang felt that there was no need to confront her elderly family. Gu Mingtang just moved back to her yard, and Gu Mingshao came with a maid. This is Tsueyu, who used to work in the Zhongsu Marquis mansion. After the Zhongsu Marquis mansion was defeated, these servants went to the dental shop. Recently, a few people have been released from the mansion, so I contacted Yapozi and bought a few more. I immediately fell in love with her, so I brought her to show my second sister. Gu Mingtang looked up and down at Tsueyu and asked her, "It looks good." He then asked, "Who did you serve in the Zhongsu Marquis mansion before?" Tsueyu lowered her head and said, "As for Miss Air, I used to serve Miss San in the Zhongsu Marquis mansion." Gu Mingshao was afraid that Gu Mingtang would not want a jade, so she interjected at the right time, "You should have heard of the third girl from the Zhongsu Marquis mansion, and she is quite famous in the capital. The people she serves around her are probably not bad." Tsueyu said again, "I have been selling myself to the Zhongsu Marquis mansion since I was young and have been serving 3rd Mississippi. Although I am a second-class maid next to 3rd Miss has mentioned before that when there is a vacancy next to her, I will be promoted." These two people are shouting so urgently, afraid she won't want them, it's all so funny. Gu Mingtang took Tsueyu's hand, carefully examined her, and then looked at Gu Mingshao, saying, "Since my sister carefully selected it, it must be good. I believe in my sister's ability to judge people. Tsueyu, then you can stay at my Haitang courtyard and work with Lotus in the future." Tsueyu was overjoyed and immediately crouched down, saying, "Thank you, Mississippi. I will do my best to serve Mississippi." Gu Mingshao also breathed a sigh of relief, and she reminded Tsueyu again, "You're new here, so you need to learn more. Futsu is an old lady next to second sister. If you have anything you don't understand, just ask Futsu for advice." The jade is engraved and called. Fu Chu stood beside Gu Mingtang and humbly said, "I am clumsy. In the future, I will support and assist Sister Tsueyu, and serve her well together." Tsueyu also humbly said, "Sister Lotus, you're welcome." Tsueyu stayed smoothly, and Gu Mingshao was satisfied. Before leaving, he secretly exchanged a glance with Tsueyu. Gu Mingtang saw everything in his eyes, and a slight smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Tsueyu should make good use of this person. In the future, she will have to fiercely thrust a knife into Gu Mingshao. Chapter 006. Falling into the water is not a slip. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After recovering from her illness, Gu Mingtang went to the place where she had previously slipped and fallen into the water. She suspected that perhaps even her falling into the water this time was not really an accident, but someone deliberately did it. In her past life, she was unaware of Gu Mingshao's malicious thoughts, so she didn't think too much. But now she knows that Gu Mingshao has been secretly targeting her since the beginning of the morning. so she suspects that her falling into the water this time was secretly designed by Gu Mingshao. As my grandmother said, why did so many people pass by that pond without any problems, and only she fell into the water? I never thought about this before, but upon closer reflection, it's really strange. But it's been several days now, and it's probably difficult to find evidence. Lotus doesn't understand why the master is still here. The wind is strong by the pond, and the wind is even cold. The master only recovers, don't freeze the disease anymore. Miss, the wind is strong here. Let's go back. Gu Mingtang squatted where she fell into the water, looking thoughtful. Fuqiu, you said there were so many people passing by here in a day, why didn't anyone else fall into the water, but I did. I'm just so unlucky. Fuqiu sat next to Gu Mingtang and squatted down with her, looking into the water. Ah, when people are unlucky, sometimes drinking water is like stuffing teeth, and the girl is suffering. Fuqiu obviously didn't understand Gu Mingtang's meaning. Gu Mingtang glanced at her at the sound, feeling helpless in his heart. Sure enough, like a master, like a servant. She is foolish, and the maids around her are also simpler than others. Like her, she has no idea. I mean, could it be that I fell into the water and didn't make a mistake? Time was too long, and she couldn't remember exactly what happened when I fell into the water. If you can remember, perhaps you can still find some clues. But now, it's not entirely impossible. However, Lotus was surprised and screamed, what the girl means is. You keep it down. Gu Mingtang covered her mouth and looked around. Seeing that there was no one here for the time being, he finally let go. Fuqiu realized that the problem might be more serious, so she immediately leaned in Gu Mingtang's ear and asked, Miss, did you mean someone deliberately caused you to fall into the water? If that's really the case, then who would it be? Miss Air has the most honest and kind-hearted personality, and her family is also very popular. Who would harm her? Gu Mingtang did not answer Lotus's question, but suddenly stood up and said, let's go. Let's go back. Fuqiu was puzzled and closely followed behind Gu Mingtang, whispering, are we leaving now? What if someone really harmed the girl? Gu Mingtang remained silent. Returning to the begonia garden, Sueyu immediately welcomed her. Where has the girl gone? It's easy to find a servant. What are you asking me for? Gu Mingtang asked as he took off his cloak tied outside. Sueyu said, the old lady just sent someone over. It said that the old lady from the Marquis' mansion of Guanyang has come. The old lady from the Marquis' mansion of Guanyang has brought her granddaughter, and our old lady wants you and the young lady to accompany us. Speaking of this incident, Gu Mingtang suddenly remembered some things. In her past life, not long after she stumbled and fell into the water, the old lady of the Su family in the Marquis' mansion of Guanyang came knocking on her door. It is said to be a visit, but everyone knows it well and actually comes to see each other. Mr. Su brought his granddaughter Su Jiaojiao, which was actually meant to be seen by their elderly lady. Their elder brother Gu Sheng has not yet been married. And the old lady asked her to go with Gu Mingshao, which was also to show respect to Mr. Su. In her past life, perhaps Gu Mingshao had learned this news in advance, which caused her to slip and fall into the water. She should have had two plans at the time. Firstly, if she was seriously ill, Mrs. Su would come to see her and she wouldn't be able to meet. If she's not seriously ill, it's okay. She's playful and unstable, and these flaws will definitely fall into Mrs. Su's ears in various ways. In her past life, she also went to see Mrs. Su. At that time, she didn't recover as quickly as she does now. When she went, her face was pale and she had no energy at all. I remember Mrs. Su even asked her what was wrong. In fact, her performance at that time was very poor. Her complexion was not as good as Gu Mingshao's, and her speech and behavior were not as stable and generous as Gu Mingshao's. Her reputation outside was also not as good as Gu Mingshao's. But in the end, the Su family still took a liking to her and appointed her as Su Ji's daughter. Law. She thought, at that time, Gu Mingshao must have hated her deeply, right? It was precisely because of a deep hatred that she resorted to such vulgar means to deal with her, which resulted in her and Su Ji being married for many years without ever getting married. In this life, she didn't want to have any further involvement with the Su family, but since the old lady came to shout, she didn't hesitate to go. She has reached her age, and even if she doesn't marry into the Su family in the future, she will have to marry into someone else's house. So, we still need to leave a good impression on these people who come to see each other. Got it. Gu Mingtang smiled and went back to his inner bed, changed into clothes, then came out and called out to Tsueyu. You and Futsu, come with me. Tsueyu was in high demand and immediately claimed to be. On the way, Gu Mingtang quietly gave Futsu a glance. Futsu understood and immediately said, Miss, will we still go to the pond tomorrow? I won't go. But didn't the girl say she wanted to find evidence? The evidence hasn't been found yet, why didn't she go? Fu Chu looked puzzled. Gu Mingtang smiled slightly before saying, Silly girl, of course we have found evidence. Miss, have you found evidence? Fu Chu's face was full of shock, but she suddenly smiled with relief. That's great, otherwise miss, this hard work will be for nothing. She suddenly became serious again, who did that harm Mississippi? Coincidentally, we arrived at the entrance of Rongan Hall. It was not the right time to speak now. After a shush, Gu Mingtang instructed the two of Fu Chu Tsueyu, Madam, don't speak recklessly. The Su family is also here today, so don't make a fool of yourself. Lotus immediately nodded and said, I understand. Tsueyu's reaction was slower, as if she was thinking something. After hearing Fu Chu's words, she followed closely and replied, I understand too. Gu Mingshao is already present in the warm pavilion where Rongan Hall is waiting for delicate guests. There is also an old lady sitting in the upper position with Mrs. Gu, who is an old man from the Su family. The young girl sitting next to her by the Su family's old man was Su Ji's sister Su Jiaojiao. After roughly glancing at the people in the room, Gu Mingtang went over to greet them in a proper manner and said, My granddaughter pays her respects to my grandmother. He then squatted in the direction of Mrs. Su and said, Mingtang has seen Mrs. Su. After getting up, he smiled at Su Jiaojiao and said, Hello, Su's younger sister. Su Jiaojiao had already stood up when Gu Mingtang entered the door. Seeing Gu Mingtang greeting her, she immediately shyly responded, Gu's sister is doing well. Originally, Mrs. Gu thought that this granddaughter would lose her dignity in front of the Su sisters and be looked down upon by Mrs. Su, but she was really sweating for her. But I didn't expect that she would behave like this today. After this illness, people have become more obedient. Mrs. Gu was satisfied in her heart, and her gaze towards Gu Mingtang became even more compassionate. Second girl, come and sit next to me. Mrs. Gu specially called Gu Mingtang to her side, just as Su Jiaojiao was sitting next to Mrs. Su. In this way, Gu Mingshao appeared a bit abrupt and lonely sitting alone below, making her feel like an extra person. Chapter 007. The Marquis' mansion talks about marriage. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Looking at the scene before her, Gu Mingshao's heart was filled with resentment and unwillingness, and a pair of pink fists were almost crushed. Just because it's not at her peony garden right now, she can't vent these emotions. This girl is mischievous, not as steady as the big girl, Mrs. Gu said bluntly. She knew what the Su family's old man meant. Su Sanlang had reached the age of marriage, and Mrs. Su had been looking for a wife for him recently. Coming to their house today, I'm afraid their two maids are also within her consideration range. But marriage is the best thing to have two surnames, and she doesn't want to hide or deceive. The status of the second maid is noble, but in terms of character and talent, she is indeed not comparable to the eldest maid. Since Mr. Su came with sincerity, she didn't want to hide it from her. Regardless of which one the Su family chooses, they are all her granddaughter who left the Marquis' mansion in Ning'an. Or choose neither, it's okay. Both girls are still young, so it's okay to slowly choose one for a year and a half. Don't worry. Mrs. Su stared fixedly at the young girl in front of her, her slightly plump face filled with a loving smile. She is extremely satisfied with Gu Mingtang's appearance. Gu Mingshao naturally has an outstanding appearance, but among the unmarried girls in the capital, she is not particularly outstanding. But Gu Mingtang is different. She is unparalleled in beauty, and among the unmarried women in Beijing, she is considered outstanding in appearance. Even before it grows, it is already so outstanding. In 2 more years, when she grows up, she will definitely have a stunning appearance. In fact, marrying a wife and a virtuous person is the only way to accept women. But Sanlang and their family is different from others. Sanlang has had a high vision since childhood, and he always strives to be almost perfect in everything. So, in the matter of marrying a wife, the same is naturally true. She understands that if it weren't for a peerless and beautiful woman, her grandson might not be interested. So, in her heart, the standard for choosing a wife for Sanlang is, first, to be beautiful, and second, to consider family background, talent, and character. Although Ning'an Marquis' mansion may not be comparable to their Guanyang Marquis' mansion, it is still the residence of the Marquis. And this Gu heir girl is still legitimate, so her identity is naturally not a problem. Next, it's up to character to learn. Just now, I saw that she had been very polite, and I think she might have been a bit mischievous, but I understand the rules. After all, it's still young, and a little mischievous is not a problem. Mr. Su's heart was filled with joy, and his gaze towards Gu Mingtang became even more gentle and kind. I see that both girls in your family are pretty good. They are truly your granddaughter, older sister. They are all good. Unlike the one in my family, who is always silent and stuffy everywhere. Madame Gu immediately said, "Sister, you are so humble. I think the 4th Miss is better than the 2 of my family in all aspects." After lifting each other up, both of them laughed again. Mrs. Su clearly had a crush on Gu Mingtang, and Gu Mingshao couldn't laugh. Alternatively, even if I didn't take a liking to Gu Mingtang, I still didn't take a liking to her. Gu Mingshao felt aggrieved, ashamed and angry in her heart. For a moment, various emotions surged in. Besides her identity, where is she not stronger than Gu Mingtang? Why can Gu Mingtang easily obtain it, but she uses all kinds of means not to? Mrs. Su didn't stay long either. After sitting down for a while, she stood up and said goodbye. Gu Mingshao gave Maid a glance, and Maid nodded knowingly before quietly retreating. Before coming over, Gu Mingshao had already told Maid that no matter who the Su family's old man was interested in, when she left, she must let her know about Gu Mingtang's recent drowning. So Maid is going out now to handle this matter. Of course, Maid couldn't handle this matter herself, so she had already prepared the maid to handle it. Mrs. Su bid farewell to the Gu family and left Rong'an Hall with Su Jiaojiao. On the way, Mrs. Su specifically asked her granddaughter for her opinion. "Do you think which of the 2 sisters from the Gu family is better?" Su Jiaojiao and Gu Mingtang are closer in age, and they are both unknown in the prestigious women's circle in Beijing, which makes Su Jiaojiao feel a bit familiar. Gu Mingshao is somewhat famous in the prestigious women's circle in Beijing. She seems to be very enthusiastic about making friends with various talented women, and has a bit of a desire to seek fame and reputation. As for the 2 girls from the Gu family, they are easygoing and seem to not value those external things. They get along much more happily. The eldest girl from the Gu family is steady and dignified, and treats people very gently and kindly. No matter who she meets, she always smiles like a spring breeze. But she couldn't get close to such a person. Sister Gu is quite good, but I prefer Sister Gu heir. Su Jiaojiao was also frank. Mrs. Su glanced at her granddaughter upon hearing her reputation, but didn't say anything, she just smiled. Suddenly, a maid rushed over on the road. That maid happened to bump into Su Jiaojiao. Su Jiaojiao was born small and delicate, almost falling from her collision. The nanny next to Su Jiaojiao immediately cursed, "Who doesn't have eyes?" but was stopped by Mr. Su's hand. "In someone else's house, there's no need to be so arrogant." The maid who bumped into Su Jiaojiao immediately knelt down and kowtowed heavily in front of Su's grandparents, apologizing, "Damn it. Damn it. I don't have eyes when I walk. I bumped into Su's wife and the fourth girl, and I still ask the old lady and the girl to punish me. But just a collision, the person must be fine. How can outsiders punish their domestic slaves?" So, upon hearing these words, Mrs. Su only smiled. "It's not a problem, you didn't mean to, forget it." But the maid still knelt down and said, "The old lady didn't punish me because of your leniency. Can you also allow me to explain a few words for myself? I am a maid in the courtyard of the second girl in the mansion. Because the second girl fell into water a few days ago and fell ill, I needed to hurry up and decoct medicine for her, so I was a bit anxious. I was anxious, so I didn't look too far, so I ran into the girl." "Oh. Are you the maid of Miss Guer's yard?" Mrs. Su suddenly became interested. "I am a servant," the maid replied. "I am just a rough servant in the courtyard of Miss Eyre, doing some rough work and rarely seeing the master's face." Suddenly, she showed a worried expression and continued to kowtow, "I beg the old lady, please don't tell Miss Eyre about this, otherwise. I. She trembled with fear. Mr. Su, who lived in a high place, looked at the maid and suddenly laughed, "Don't worry, it's not worth suing your master for such a small matter. You can go too." "Thank you very much, Mrs. Su." After kowtowing again, the maid got up and ran away. Su Jiaojiao turned her head and suddenly said, "This person is so strange. Do you also see something strange?" Mrs. Su smiled. Su Jiaojiao nodded and then said her own opinion, "As a rough servant girl, how could we know our identity as soon as we meet? And how could a servant girl say something wrong about our master in front of outsiders? We all said we wouldn't investigate, and she even said a lot of things, as if she deliberately said it to us." Mrs. Su knew everything in her heart, and she smiled and said, "The two girls from the Marquis of Ningyan mansion are quite interesting." Chapter 008. The big girl panicked. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Gu Mingtang also had a chance. Fu Chu secretly followed behind Mrs. Su's grandparents and grandchildren, asking her to follow from a distance until she reached the entrance of the Marquis' mansion to see if anything happened along the way. So halfway through, the incident of Su Jiaojiao being bumped into by a little maid in the mansion was naturally seen by Fu Chu. After watching the Su family's ancestors and grandchildren step out of the gate of the Marquis' mansion, Fu Chu immediately turned her head and hurriedly returned to the Haitang courtyard. In the Haitang courtyard, Gu Mingtang is also waiting for the lotus flowers. At this point, Cueyu had already been sent out by Gu Mingtang on the pretext. So, only Gu Mingtang and Fu Chu, the master and servant, were left in the inner bedroom. How about it? Gu Mingtang was also very eager. Although she guessed in her heart, she still wanted to get a clear answer. Lotus ran back all the way, panting heavily and unable to speak for a moment. Upon seeing this, Gu Mingtang immediately poured a cup of hot water for Lotus. "Drink it, moisten your throat." "Thank you, girl." There were no outsiders here, and Lotus didn't follow the rules too well. She just took the water and drank it. After finishing her drink, she said, "Miss, everything is as planned. Something happened on the way." Upon hearing this, Gu Mingtang smiled instead. Sure enough, she guessed right. Gu Mingshao was restless and played tricks behind her back. Now Gu Mingtang was no longer in a hurry and only asked slowly, "What happened there? Please explain it in detail and slowly tell me." Then Fu Chu told the master what she saw. At the same time, Mingtang is also reporting this matter to her master at the Shaoxiang Academy. After hearing this, Gu Mingshao nodded and ordered, "Bring her some silver and make sure to stop her mouth. Also, isn't her mother sick? Give her another 5 taels of silver and give it to her family." Mingtang said yes. As Mingtang and his wife were talking, a maid came in and reported, "Cueyu from the second girl's courtyard has arrived." Upon hearing this, Gu Mingshao immediately perked up her spirits. "Hurry up and ask her to come in and see me." At the same time, he sent everyone in the room out. "Mingtang, stay, let the rest of you step back." Cueyu did indeed come from the Zhongsu Marquis' mansion. After the Zhongsu Marquis' mansion fell and her family was stolen, she, like the other servants in the mansion, was sold to various places. Some of them were unlucky and even sold to the land of fireworks. So the young lady from the Gu family was very grateful for being able to save her from danger. Cueyu was arranged by Gu Mingshao to be by Gu Mingtang's side in order to constantly grasp the situation there. Cueyu was also eager to express her sincerity to Gu Mingshao, so today, the conversation between Gu Mingtang and the master servant of Lotus was transmitted to Gu Mingshao by her. Cueyu felt strange upon hearing this, and did not know what had happened. However, she did not expect that her eagerness to act well, but she accidentally made a big contribution. After hearing this, Gu Mingshao felt extremely anxious. Upon hearing Cueyu's words, it was obvious that Gu Mingtang's master and servant had found something by the pond. Did they say anything else? Gu Mingshao asked urgently with a serious expression on her face. No more, Cueyu shook her head. At that time, she had already arrived at Roman Hall, so Miss Eyre wouldn't let her talk. Gu Mingshao remained silent for a moment, then softened her expression and said to Cueyu, "I understand. You go back first. Remember, you are my person, so don't let Miss Eyre know. If there is anything else in the future, you don't need to come to me personally. Just talk to Mingtang. Twice is okay, but if she always comes to Shaoxiang Academy, she's afraid that Gu Mingtang might have doubts." "Yes, I know." Cueyu didn't ask much. After Cueyu left, Mingtang became anxious and said, "Miss, how can this be good? If Miss Eyre really gets any evidence, what should she do if she sues the old lady?" Gu Mingshao was even more anxious than Mingtang. She didn't expect Gu Mingtang to return to the place where she fell after recovering. What's even more unexpected is that she found something. But what did she find? Gu Mingshao was in a hurry and ordered Mingtang to call out the maid who had been working by the pond that day. The maid knelt on the ground and was also greatly frightened when she heard that she might have dropped something by the pond. If Miss Eyre really holds on to something and turns around to report it to the old lady, then she will be finished. Although the old lady doesn't like Miss Eyre very much, she is still the master. The servant harmed the master, which is also a great sin. "Miss, you must save the servant." The servant knelt on the ground and walked on her knees to Gu Mingshao's lap. "Please help the servant." "How can I help you?" Gu Mingshao's first reaction was to protect herself with a clear mind. The first thought that flashed through her mind was how she would clean herself up if there really was a day when the east window incident occurred. At the same time, she also detested the person in front of her for being so disadvantageous in handling things. She was asked to do so little, but she couldn't even do it well. If things don't go well, even if she fails herself, it's very likely that it will still affect her now. The maid kept crying and pleading with Gu Mingshao, "Miss, I am here to do things for you. I am from your yard, and if we really take responsibility, I'm afraid we will also implicate you, Mississippi." Of course Gu Mingshao knows. After forcibly suppressing her anger and forcing herself to calm down, Gu Mingshao suddenly came up with a solution. Recently, a group of people are being released from the mansion. Although you are not yet old, if I help you, you can also redeem yourself in advance and leave the mansion first. How about that? Are you willing? A maid in the mansion, as long as she is not a biological child or has signed a lifelong contract with the Marquis' mansion, usually gets a chance to choose at 20. If willing to stay, continue to sign a contract with the Marquis' mansion. If unwilling, take a sum of silver to redeem oneself and go home. The treatment in the Marquis' mansion is good. Generally speaking, if there is no more reliable home, the maids are unwilling to leave even when they are old. But in the current situation, she is afraid that she can only take some money and leave. The maid also knew that this might be the best way, so she kowtowed and thanked, "I'll rely entirely on the girl's arrangements." Gu Mingshao nodded and reassured her, "Don't worry, I will pay you another 10 liang in private besides the 5 liang silver severance payment from the public account. After you leave the Ho's residence, go back to your hometown, and never return to Beijing." "I understand." Cuiyu left the Haitang courtyard and secretly went to the Shaoxiang courtyard, and Gu Mingtang naturally found out quickly. Even, Cuiyu was intentionally released by her. Fu Chu lay by the window and looked out at the courtyard through the crack. Seeing that Cuiyu had not returned yet, she returned to Gu Mingtang's side. "I can't believe that the young lady treats her so well on weekdays. She actually wants to harm her in her heart. Miss, why don't we sue the old lady? It saves the young lady from being obedient in front of her every day, which will please her." However, Gu Mingtang said, "In everything, we need to talk about evidence. Without evidence, empty words have no basis. On the contrary, we will be bitten back by others. Lotus, we need to be more careful every step we take in the future. Gu Mingshao and Aunt Xiao have such deep thoughts, and they must have even greater ambitions." Fu Chu looked serious and nodded seriously, "I understand. I will be even more careful in my actions from now on." Chapter 009. The big girl continues to show off her horse feet. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In her past life, Aunt Xiao and her daughter had been thinking carefully for many years. In the end, shortly after her mother passed away, Aunt Xiao was supported by her father. Aunt Xiao became the legitimate wife, and her son Gu Sheng was her legitimate son. In the future, it was only natural for her to be granted the title of Crown Prince of the Marquis' mansion. Aunt Xiao's maternal family was originally a scholarly family, but she was exiled to Lingnan by plagiarism because she offended the emperor. But as long as a person is not dead, there is a chance to turn over. So, in the near future, the Xiao family will rise again and return to the capital, and Xiao's parents and brothers will also return to the court. It is precisely because of this that after her mother's death, the old man would agree to his father's support of Xiao Shi as his legitimate wife, rather than marrying another woman. The final outcome of their past lives was that the 3 brothers and sisters of the Xia family got whatever they wanted, while their mother, daughter, and siblings died, lost, and their families were ruined. Since they are reborn once, their life trajectory cannot be traced back to their past lives. Even now, she began to doubt whether it was also Xiao's fault that her younger brother got lost during the Shangyuan festival. She never regained her younger brother until her death in her past life. And the mother, on the other hand, became ill due to the loss and longing for her younger brother, and gradually withered her body day by day. In this life, she wants to find her younger brother and let her mother live well. Gu Mingtang now comes to his mother almost every day, sitting for most of the day. Sometimes I talk to my mother, and sometimes I help her check her accounts and handle some miscellaneous matters. So, when Gu Mingshao comes to report the situation to Yu Shi every evening, almost Gu Mingtang can have a face-to-face meeting with her. The 2 sisters are still warm and intimate when they meet, but each has his own mind. Gu Mingshao felt very anxious about the changes in Gu Mingtang during this period. She always feels like she's different, and she feels like she already knows something, but every time we get along, she feels like she's still the same as before. For a moment, Gu Mingshao couldn't figure out this sister. And for Gu Mingtang, her current mindset is much more stable than Gu Mingshao's. She has a plan in her heart, and the plans are gradually being implemented one by one. Take it slow, don't worry. After marrying Su Ji in his previous life, Gu Mingtang also took care of his affairs in the backyard for several years. Not to mention how well it is taken care of, but practice makes perfect. With many things done and handled, one naturally knows how to handle them. So, when he comes back to help his mother now, Gu Mingtang can also do very well. But this is just the beginning. Gu Mingtang dare not appear too obvious to avoid arousing suspicion. So, she just said that she wanted to learn how to handle household chores from her mother and plan for the future. Yu was naturally happy when her daughter was willing to learn these things. A daughter's family is not like a man's. There is a vast world outside where one can venture, but the daughter's family is confined to the boudoir and has very few opportunities to show off. And women will eventually get married, even if they don't learn these things at home now, they will still have to learn when they go to their husband's house in the future. She had mentioned before that she wanted her daughter to learn these things from her, but her daughter was playful and unwilling to learn them. Unexpectedly, now she has voluntarily mentioned wanting to learn from her. Indeed, I have grown up and become more sensible. For Gu Mingshao, Yu sure is not very secretive, let alone for his own daughter. So, for Gu Mingtang, the Yu family was even more generous in their teachings. She is a female merchant from the Yu family and the only daughter of the Yu family. She has been very favored since childhood. When she was very young, she began to learn how to handle the affairs of the government from her mother, and as she grew older, she even began to learn how to do business from her father and brother. Unfortunately, she is a daughter, unlike men who can often appear in public, and learning to do business can only be superficial. Besides, she didn't study for long before marrying into the Marquis' mansion. Why did you suddenly take the initiative to learn, even though you were unwilling to learn in the past? Yu sure spoke in a soft and gentle tone because she was sick. Gu Mingtang now particularly likes to act spoiled to his mother. Whenever there is a chance, he always likes to get stuck by her side and hold her hand. Or it could be leaning my head against my mother's shoulder, just like when I was a child. Previously, the relationship between mother and daughter was excellent, but perhaps due to Gu Mingtang's age, she is becoming less and less clingy to her mother like she did when she was a child. In the past, I used to come every day to greet my mother and often accompany her, but now I don't spend almost the whole day with her. After growing up, Gu Mingtang has a broader world of her own, and her world is no longer just revolving around her mother. You can understand, so she never says anything about it. Even she hoped that her daughter could pursue the vast world outside, instead of being confined by her every day and feeling depressed with her. However, when her daughter was once again surrounded by her like she was when she was a child, Yu sure was truly happy in her heart. My mood has improved, and in recent days, it is evident to the naked eye that Yu's mental state has also improved compared to before. But sometimes she would still advise her daughter, when you're old, don't always stick to your mother's side. In your prime of life, you should go out and visit more families. If the marriage is settled, it's okay. If the marriage is not settled yet, can't you go out and walk around more? These past few days, Gu Mingtang's ears have been going crazy when she heard these words. She reluctantly dug out her ears and then said the same thing to her mother, they all go out with their daughters. If you don't take me out, how can I go out? You could only sigh. Mother's body. You're in great health, you're not sick at all. Gu Mingtang snatched up the words, as long as you can pick yourself up, you'll be fine. Simply put, how can she pick herself up? It has been 3 years now, and Igor still has no news. They are afraid that their mother and son will never have the chance to see each other again in this lifetime. Igor. Thinking of her young son, Yu sure couldn't help but shed tears. Gu Mingtang knew that the lost younger brother was a heartache of his mother. As long as there is some news about my younger brother, my mother's illness will definitely improve by half immediately. In the past life, there was no direction and I didn't know where to start, so several years passed without any news. And now that we have a clue, the enemy may be right beside us, so it won't be so difficult to find them again. Mom, just relax your mind. My younger brother must be able to find him, Gu Mingtang said in a very affirmative tone. You only treated her daughter as a way to make her happy, but did not take it seriously. She raised her hand to wipe away the tears from the corners of her eyes and forced out a smile, saying, all right, let's not talk about this anymore. Her own sadness was enough, and she couldn't bring her daughter to grieve together. Let me see if you've made any progress these past few days. The mother and daughter finished chatting and started looking at the ledger together. Gu Mingtang knows all these accounting methods, so some of them are just playing tricks, whether they are listening or not. She glanced at a piece of paper beside her and suddenly stopped. Mother, what is this? Gu Mingtang asked. You glanced and said, oh, she said, isn't there a group of people going out of the mansion recently? The list of people going out is recorded on this paper. Oh, is this handled by sister? She asked as she took the piece of paper to look at. Chapter 010. Dreaming of My Brother. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Well, this is a small matter, so I didn't ask. You sure obviously didn't take the matter of letting people out of the mansion to heart. She is currently in poor health and unable to handle many things. She just needs to continue to handle a few of the most important things, and she plans to gradually let go of these small things. The old lady and the Marquis are interested in the young lady, so let the young lady take care of her. Her elder brother E has disappeared, and I don't know if they will have a chance to meet again in the future. If not, the entire whole mansion will be owned by Aunt Xiao and her mother and son in the future. Yu sure doesn't mind the existence of Aunt Xiao, it's just that although her son is gone, her daughter is still alive. In the future, the Marquis' mansion will eventually fall into the hands of Gu Sheng. After his daughter gets married, she will always have the support of her family. If I really confront Aunt Xiao and her son and offend them severely, what will the Marquis' mansion do if they don't support their daughter from now on? Yu has too many things to consider, so in many things, she cannot let her temperament be reckless. For example, when it comes to teaching Gu Mingshao to keep accounts and handle household affairs, Yu sure is not secretive and is indirectly showing goodwill to Aunt Xiao. The daughter and the eldest girl got closer and their relationship improved, and she was also happy to see each other succeed. Gu Mingtang's gaze still fell on the piece of paper, his gaze slowly passing over the names one by one. Seeing that her mother was completely unprepared in these matters, she couldn't help but say, there are no small matters in the matter of the harem, every pile is a big matter, and my mother must not take it lightly. It's okay if nothing goes wrong. Once something happens, it's my mother's responsibility. Although it was handled by Gu Mingshao, it was her mother who ultimately made the decision. There was really a mistake, and it wasn't her mother who took the blame in the end. Yu sure is becoming less and less angry now. When she heard the sound, she only smiled and said, it's just letting a few people out. What can be wrong? The young lady can't even handle this matter well. She would also talk to her daughter about their current situation. Yu continued, Gu heir has not received any news for a long time, and now the title belongs to our second wife. In the future, not all of this large Marquis' mansion will belong to their mother and son. Although my mother is unhappy in her heart, she is also helpless, and the fact is that Aunt Xiao and her family also have a clear understanding of this, so they have not been arguing for anything in these years. Sooner or later, it will be their own, and what are they still arguing for? I don't think it's useful anymore, and now it's just a false name. When Brother Sheng marries his wife, the power of the family will eventually be handed over to his wife. The young lady also understands in her heart, so she must be attentive to everything and won't even be unable to handle small things. And if I ask her about these small things, it will make her feel unhappy and resentful. Having a resentful heart is not a problem, but she is afraid that she may lose heart with her daughter because of it. What she fears the most is that her daughter will have a difficult future. Gu Mingtang knew in her heart that her mother was plotting for her, but now that she had a different path to take, she didn't want to bow down and live under the lewd influence of Xiao's mother and son in the future. Mom, don't think so. My daughter said that my younger brother will definitely be found. As long as my younger brother goes home, this whole mansion will be my brother's from now on. Mom, my daughter has been dreaming about my younger brother these past few days, maybe this is a good omen. Yu's eyes lit up and he said, really? He quickly asked, what did he dream of? Gu Mingtang smiled and said, I dreamed he called me sister. Yu also laughed along, and then her eyes suddenly turned red. Gu Mingtang took advantage of the situation and said, so, we must not give up on continuing to search for our younger brother. Don't think about how to please Aunt Xiao and the others. As long as we can live with them in terms of face, we still need to have the necessary precautions in private from now on. Yu nodded thoughtfully, then suddenly realized something was wrong. She frowned and asked her daughter, you had an argument with the big girl. Otherwise, how could you say this today? Because his mother is still sick, there are some things that Gu Mingtang does not want to tell her at the moment. My mother's top priority is to take good care of her body. When she is getting better, it's not too late to tell her something slowly. She believed that if she were to tell her mother now that it was actually Gu Mingshao who caused her to fall into the water, her mother would definitely be angry and anxious, and then faint. In this way, it can only worsen her condition. So, Gu Mingtang shook his head and said, I didn't argue with big sister. But he also said, but these are two different things. My friendship with big sister is one thing, and the matter of the inner house is another thing. These two things cannot be confused. Mother, you should think of it as a way to cheer up for your daughter. It's also for your younger brother. My younger brother is just lost and will eventually be found back. If one day he comes back, but you don't get sick, how is it good? Did you really dream about your younger brother? Yu asked again. Obviously, her daughter's dream gave her hope again. Gu Mingtang swore confidently, of course. Do you think your daughter is lying to you? She looked serious and serious. Yu shook her head with a smile and said, of course not. It's just. Why didn't I dream of Gu? Gu Mingtang held her hand and said, do you also want to dream of Gu? Then quickly take care of yourself. Once you are healthy and energetic, you can dream of Gu. Yu's mood was extremely good today, so she mostly listened to her daughter's words in her heart. Yeah, her son was just lost and not dead, why did she give up on him completely? Maybe he's staying somewhere now, waiting for her to save him, how could she just give up on her own? Tanger is right. I can't just keep feeling depressed like this. I should pick myself up. Gu Mingtang hugged his mother and said happily, that's right. The days are still long, and as long as we all live well, isn't it just a matter of time for the family to reunite? Then he took the paper with the list of servants in the house and said, you have to pay attention to all the big and small things in the house. If you can't handle it, don't you still have a daughter? My daughter will help you. Yu sure is a skilled butler. Although she has only been in charge of the vast Marquis' mansion for a few years, she can understand all the matters up and down in the mansion. With the release and purchase of servants like this in the mansion, she could almost just glance and roughly see the clues. The ring of Shaoxiang Academy, the second class made next to the young lady, is only 16 or 17 this year, and she is not old enough to be released. How could she be on the list? Grandma Zhuang, take a look at this person. Although Yu's mind was clear, her body was limp and weak, and her voice was hollow. Grandma Zhuang came over to take a look and said with just one glance, this girl named Huaner is only 16 this year. How many years until she is released? How could she be on the list? Yu didn't speak, just lifted his gaze from the list with a gloomy expression. The young lady used her power to secretly manipulate the family, and Yu sure was not surprised. She just couldn't guess for a moment why the young lady took advantage of her position to release this maid. Tanger, you're getting close to the big girl. Are you familiar with this maid named Huaner? Yu asked her daughter. Gu Mingtang shook his head and said, I've seen her in the elder sister's courtyard before. I only know she's a clever girl, but I'm not very familiar with her. At this moment, Gu Mingtang probably had some points in his mind. That day, she deliberately used Sueyu to inform Gu Mingshao, and Gu Mingshao was clearly feeling guilty and scared. If you're right, she stumbled and stepped into the pond, so she should be closely related to this maid. But for now, Gu Mingtang has not told his mother about these things. After a moment of silence, Yu instructed the people around him, go and call the young lady over.